The video is recording.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned in to the second meeting of the ad hoc committee that's taking a look at recommendations for changes to Eugene police policy. Appreciate you being here tonight. I'm Kevin Altucker. I'm the lead on the ad hoc committee process, and I am very glad to be assisted by Naya and Kaz this evening, and we also have Mo as facilitator. Why are we on Zoom? Well, we're on Zoom because the governor has a stay home, stay safe order, stay homes and save lives order, and we are complying with that. The public can tune in via Zoom, and our meetings will be on the Zoom platform as long as we have the threat of COVID amongst us. We received a lot of great feedback from you all from the last meeting, and I want to touch on some of those changes that we are going to be trying this evening based on your feedback. And one of the changes that you're going to see is that we're going to have a timer system to make sure that everyone on the committee has space to voice their opinion, ask a question, and speak publicly. So we're going to have a 2-minute timer, and we're going to use an educational approach to this thing. And when you say, well, what does that mean? That means just similar to many educational organizations, including the University of Oregon, where we allow more time, for example, for students who need more accommodations on a test. So we're going to allow more time for speaking tonight for those folks who need it. And I'm going to be the person kind of administering that speaker policy. I'm going to try to do it gracefully. And I've made some very fancy visual cues. So I'm going to give you this visual cue, which is a yellow card after you have 30 seconds remaining of your 2 minutes. And then I'm going to give you this red card, time's up. At the same time, I'm going to give you a delightful little audible chime. So you're going to have a visual cue and an audio cue. It's going to sound like this. So when you hear that, that means time is up and we need to move on to the next speaker. We're trying to administer this timing system from the viewpoint of equity and not equality, getting back to some folks might need a little more time. All right. The other thing I want to mention is the chat function. Now, the chat function is turned off for attendees. Hello, welcome attendees. We're glad you're here. But you will not be able to participate using the chat function. The chat function we're going to leave on tonight for the panelists, and we ask that you only use that chat function for procedural issues. Keep in mind, we must comply with Oregon public meeting law, and anything that's in the chat, the public cannot see. So we ask that you do not have substantial side conversations with other panelists using the chat feature, because that would violate the spirit and the letter of Oregon public meeting law. This is a similar situation that the Eugene City Councilors have, and they use the chat function very, very sparingly, keeping in mind that that is public record. All right, the third thing that I would like to tell you is that we have a method, a simple method to address your questions that will come up during the committee meeting. And it's going to go like this. If Mo gets a question and she doesn't know the answer, she will turn to me. If I don't know the answer, I will toss it to Kaz. If he doesn't know the answer, he will ask a council person or city attorney to answer the question. And if we can't answer the question with all of that, we'll say, we will get back to you, committee, with the answer. All right? Couple of informational things I want you to know. We had hoped that we were going to get that prioritization survey out to you before today. Obviously, that didn't happen. We are taking extra time to make sure that that survey includes all of the issues contained within Campaign Zero and 21st Century Policing. And it's taking a bit more time than we had thought. Our hope is that we get the survey out in the next couple days. As a reminder, that prioritization survey is going to allow committee members to rank your top projects, and we will then add all of those rankings up and determine the pecking order, if you will, the issues that we're going to be studying first. All right. We also had intended to send you a doodle poll. We didn't do that yet. We're working on it. So expect to receive a doodle poll in your email inbox in the next few days. This is how we're going to determine all of the times and dates of the remaining meetings so that you can get them on your calendar. That's important. All right. Tonight's meeting is unique in that we have already scheduled 3 speakers to make presentations. It's going to be a fairly full agenda. And we may not, and probably will not, get to an opportunity to have an open discussion regarding recommendations that you may want to see come out of stemming from tonight's presentations. So I'm going to ask you that if we do run out of time, that don't panic. Please, you can send your comments and recommendations to myself and Kaz, and we will field those. And finally, as we move forward, and before I toss it off, well, we have one more procedural thing. But as we move forward, I hope that we can all keep one common value that I think most human beings share, and that is the value of safety. That is critically important. So folks in our city need to feel safe. They need to feel safe in their homes. They need to feel safe walking down the street, playing in the park, driving their cars down the street, shopping in a store. They need to feel safe. And at the same time, our first responders need to feel safe doing their jobs as well. This is a common value that I think that we will find much shared interest and common values. So one more procedural thing before I give the meeting over to Mo, and that is the approval of the minutes. You should have all received copies of the minutes in the informational packet, and it is now time to approve those minutes by a majority vote of the committee. If there are comments or changes, now is the time to bring those to our attention.
Silverio has his hands raised.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is this to do with the minutes?
Point of clarification. I just wanted to understand what type of survey is going to be sent out. You said it's going to be information that we're going to discuss, but is it discussions that we've already had at this point, or just remaining information on the 21st century policing? And
sure. Thanks, Silverio. I can comment. The survey that we will send out will be asking you to prioritize in rank order the topics that you would like to focus on. And so we will aggregate everyone's rankings and come up with a final comprehensive ranking. And that's how the committee will step through the issues.
So we'll be filling in the information according to our own wants or feel the discussion of what we feel needs to be discussed, or is it based upon something that you're going to be sending out?
It's going to be based on what is contained in Campaign Zero and 21st Century Policing. And there will be a space on the survey, Silverio, that will allow you to write in a topic that may not be included in those. So there'll be that opportunity as well. Yes. If there are no changes, comments to the minutes from last week.
Maybe remind folks that city councilors and, oh wait. Maybe
Naya, your audio cut out.
I think she's trying to say that city councilors are going to keep their cameras off to make more space on the screen.
Thank you, Counselor Ye. Yes. So a reminder for non-committee members to turn their video off to make more room for committee members. Thank you. And I'm also getting a reminder, and Mo will also remind you, to use the virtual hand raise function. So click on the virtual hand raise, and that way you will get in the queue, and we'll be able to address your questions more efficiently that way. Because you're spread over several screens, we can't see you all at once. So you may be waving frantically and wondering, why is Kevin or why is Mo ignoring me? Well, we can't see you. So please use that virtual hand raise function. All right, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last week's meeting.
I second the motion.
I cannot make the motion. The committee, a committee member needs to make the motion.
I would like to move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting and a second. I believe, Marty, you have the motion and Rick Rosetta second. Is that correct? Very good. Now we need a vote.
I didn't get the minutes from last week. I'm sorry, I was not present, and it's important that we all get them. Who didn't get the minutes either? Because we cannot approve them if we haven't read them, right?
That is correct. I believe, Patricia, was that you with the comment?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes.
I just want to ask a question, if it's pertinent right now, about last week process that I missed and I didn't read the minutes. So it's a quick quest. Since I read the calendar and that I see that we have every session is going to be a different subject. My question is very specific. If you guys are going to present which policies will be touching in our community, in which policies are affecting, and how we're gonna be wording the changes. So, so in the deliverables that you will present, they can be seen and that we can comment.
Yeah, Patricia, that's a great question, and I'm going to have to ask that I address that after the meeting,
Okay.
because we have a really tight timeline tonight. And I apologize if you did not receive the minutes. It was my understanding that they were all sent out. We can go ahead with the vote, I believe. All right. Well, okay. Do we use the virtual hand up? Is that the best way to do this?
I would do that and then just read it out loud.
Sorry, what was that, Mo?
I would do that and then just read folks' names out loud so it's in the record.
Okay, great. Let's do that. So all in favor of the motion to approve last week's minutes, raise your virtual hand and I will read your name off as they come up on the chat. Virtual hand, click your virtual hand. I'm thinking that people are not understanding the virtual hand.
Well, if you click in participants, then you see down below, invite, mute me, or raise hand. And that's right where you have to click.
Right, Patricia, you're like, okay, so here's Kevin's clunkiness on the Zoom. Thank you for the help. All right, we've got Silver, we've got Rick, we've got Jason. I should read full names. Silver Mogart, Rick Rosetta, Jason Mock, Joshua Purvis, David Size, Quentin Reynolds, Ems Avalos, Lindsay Foltz, Maisie Davis, Twana Nelson, Sandra Shotridge, Daniel Borson, Marty Wilder, Justin Myers, Dr. Betsy Davis, and I remember you saying, don't call me doctor, just call me Betsy Davis. All right. Leah Edelman, Brian Michael, Leticia Cerna.
See, Ali has her hand raised.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't find my raise hand thing on the Zoom tonight, so.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and
So,
Guadalupe, is that happening for you too?
Yeah, I clicked, I mean, there's no place where I click where it shows I could raise my hand, so I'm just gonna raise my hand. And then-
Okay.
Okay, and Rick Hamilton
Guadalupe
also.
Quinn, Rick Hamilton, thank you. And Alai. All right, do we have them all?
All the yeses, I think.
All the yeses. All right. Now,
Here's the trick now. Everyone has to put their hand down.
right, everyone has to put their hand down.
Hey, Mo and Kevin, this is Erica.
Hi.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a little question about the minutes. So when we are approving the minutes, are we approving all the content that we decided last meeting?
We're approving the minutes as written and presented, yes.
Okay, so because I just, last week, there is something that we forgot to mention. And it was about the issue of qualified immunity.
Okay, so are you saying that was not mentioned in the minutes?
Yeah, well, we forgot to mention.
Okay, well, what we're voting on.
I was a little confused whether it's at the minutes that what we wrote last week or whether we are approving the time of our intervention, the minutes of our intervention. So I'm not sure which minutes are we talking about.
We're voting right now on the minutes as written from the meeting last week.
Okay.
Yep.
So just
Erica, thank you. And I'm not sure I understand your question correctly, but we do have a vote in process. And now I'm asking for all those nays not approving last week's minutes. If you could raise your virtual hand.
Okay. I was just raising my hand because I wasn't sure. Okay. So I'm raising my hand now.
You're raising your hand as a negative vote. Is that my understanding?
Oh, no.
No?
Well, okay, hold on. Let me rewind. Okay, so I'm just saying that last week I would have loved to be able to say that within our intervention, that among the themes that we were going to include would be qualified immunity.
Sure.
And, just want to be sure that is put out there, but also I thought we might be voting on the time of the minutes, so I just wanted to be sure, clarifying questions.
Sure.
And I think
right.
I can help.
I can. Go ahead.
I'm gonna just try to clarify, and if this doesn't help, I apologize. But one of the things that I wanted to let folks know as we move into this meeting is that if there's a particular policy recommendation that comes up that the group wants to make tonight regarding this night's topic, they can, but it can also happen later. So you will have more chances to talk about the content from tonight and the content from last meeting. So I've written down qualified immunity. The good news is the survey hasn't gone out yet. So we'll make sure that it, as well as the other issues that were brought up in the last meeting, are in the survey. And so what I'm hearing you say is that that's really important to you, that is in the options of what we talk about. And I want to assure you that it will be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mo.
So if that is including, and I'm agreeing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we are now raising our hands for a nay vote. I see Quentin Reynolds. Is that your intent to vote negative? See, you're muted,
We
Quentin.
have him counted as a, I thought he was counted as a yes, so maybe get that confirmed.
Yeah, Quentin, just confirming your vote as a yes. And Jason, I see your suggestion in the chat. And again, forgive my clunkiness on the Zoom platform, folks. There is a poll function available on Zoom, and we will be using that in the future, but please be patient with me, all right? Quentin, you voted in the affirmative for the minutes, is that correct?
You're muted.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you, Quentin.
Well, I think it's okay. We can,
It's a technology issue on his side. It's not.
yeah, we can note that and confirm, but I am keeping the numbers for yes and no, so.
Thank you, Naya. So Sandra, I know that you voted affirmative. Patricia Toledo, I am not sure that is a positive or a negative.
Negative, okay. Because I haven't read it, so I can't prove.
All right, thank you very much. Minutes pass and are approved from last week. Whew. I guarantee you folks that next time we do this, I'm gonna be a whole lot better at it, and I appreciate your patience. Okay, at this point in the meeting, Mo, I'm gonna toss it over to you. Take it away.
I'm gonna catch us up.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we have is whether there are questions from the last meeting, and I just wanna go back real quick to Patricia's question about, are we gonna tell you what policies to look at, or does the group get to decide? And Kevin and Kaz, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that y'all will prioritize what you want to talk about. The folks at the city will go through the policies that exist right now and say, these are the ones that fall under this umbrella. And then if there are ones that you would like to see, you'd like to suggest that you don't see that exist in that, then you can suggest those. But so my understanding is that we'll take those 120 topics in the 2 documents, and then sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat box. I'm not supposed to do that. We'll take those 120 items and then we'll put the policies under them so that you don't have to just go through the whole policy book every single time. So hopefully that, I got a thumbs up from Kevin, so I hear that.
Yep.
That looks like that's the right answer. Does anyone else have questions from the last meeting? Okay, I'm scrolling back and forth and I don't see anybody.
So part of the question was if we as what the intention is that we suggest the wording, the changes that we're going to include, or like Kevin, that is the facilitator, or the one who is going to write the deliverables for the city commission. Is he going to write it and then we're going to review it? And when is going to be reviewed? Because if this is the time where we're going to talk about it, when is the time when are we going to review what is written by Kevin?
Yeah, I can answer that question, Patricia. Thank you. So the committee will have time in January to review the report that is being drafted. So the report will not be given to City Council for their review until after the committee has had a chance to approve it.
And my hope, just to piggyback on that, is that as you all look at these policies, you'll be making motions that are real specific about the language that you want to see, and that language is what goes into the report. So the idea is that as we move forward, you're making your recommendations as we go. And like I said earlier, you can always go back and say, hey, I forgot to say this thing this last time. And then at the end of that, Kevin will have all of the things that you've suggested in the report. And then you'll look at it before it goes to council.
Yep.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying the question. Daniel, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. So previously I was on the mayor's ad hoc committee on the Climate Action Plan 2.0, and city staff did a great job with that, but I also recognize that there's a lot of leeway and discretion in what staff brings to the committee and how it's brought to the committee. And could you just tell a little about the internal decision-making process in staff as to how those decisions are made, who ultimately makes the final decisions on those things?
I can take that one.
This is my first time. I got to say, Kevin, take it away. I don't work for
Yeah,
the city,
great.
so I don't know
Okay.
how to answer that.
And I actually know the answer to the question, so yay. So this committee is a little bit different, Daniel, in that we are trying to give as much autonomy as possible so that you are the ones actually choosing those topics that are within the EPD policy manual that have to do with Campaign Zero and 21st century policing. That's the reason why we're going to be sending you that prioritization survey, because the topics, which you've had a little bit of, you've seen a few of those, the topics are based in those two big bodies of literature, Campaign Zero and 21st century policing. So it's actually the committee that's going to be choosing the topics. Once those topics are chosen, then myself and others will be reaching out to folks within the city to bring information to the committee as you want. And so, you know, we're hoping that you're going to ask to hear from all sorts of folks in the city, including folks from EPD during that process.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move us on. I want you all to know that I can't see you all at the same time. And so if you see me looking a little bit kind of deer in the headlights, it's because I'm clicking back and forth over and over again to see if I can read your faces and your body language. So I apologize that that is a little clunky, but I wanted to explain that. I'm going to share my screen just real briefly because I want you to see not my notes, but where is it? This one. These are the group agreements that we brought to you at the last meeting, and I would love if we could do two things. One is if we could vote on them, and the other is that I'd like to suggest that we maybe, I took one off from the other committee that I staff that was about side conversations because I didn't think it was relevant, but it turns out it's super relevant because there's a chat function. And so I wanted to suggest that we add one that is around chat function and, you know, making sure that we're staying present with our conversation. I'm seeing a couple of head nods. Okay. I'm gonna add that. Oh, I don't think I can Okay, and now I really can't see all your faces, but I would love if we could either share any group agreements you'd like to see added, or if somebody wants to make a motion to approve them as written.
I make a motion to approve the group agreements as written with the addition of the 12th item that you just added, Mo.
Thank you, Lindsay Foltz.
I have a question before you go on. What is the number 4? What does exactly mean?
It's essentially like, sometimes we say use I statements. So you say this thing happened to me, or this happened to someone in my house. but don't share don't share stories that are about other folks that could, that they wouldn't want shared in a public forum.
On the name of others, or you mean it has happened to me that I'm sharing an experience, I'm not telling who is involved, and anyway, the other person gets very offended and gets in my conversation. So if it happens to me, but it's affecting other people that is in the group, that, you know, even as a listener, how can we deal with that? Because we are talking about of officers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm talking about an experience or something that I heard and from my own group, so how can I share that experience if it's affecting somebody who is in power and is in the group right now? So I don't know if that is what you mean on this one, or how we are dealing with that problem.
Okay, I think I maybe understand what you're asking. So if I don't, I'm gonna ask you to ask me again. But the answer that is coming to my mind is I'm less worried about the stories making people feel feelings than I am about people being outed about things that happen to them that they have no control over whether or not it's shared. So if the things that are shared in here, I mean, I would imagine that most of the meetings, many people in this group or listening are going to have emotions about it. And that's okay. What we're trying to do is not say, hey, you know, this happened to my neighbor and I live on such and such street. So now folks who are listening who maybe run into my neighbor know something about them that they don't particularly want them to know. Does that make sense?
Just no names, you mean, if you are talking about somebody else.
Yeah, no names or like identifying.
Identifiable.
I see Marty has his hand up as well.
Yes, excuse me. I wanted to speak to the one that was added, number 12, and the use of the chat box. I want to say two things. As a person with a hearing impairment, it can be really beneficial to me to use the chat box, especially when someone makes reference to a link or something. That's a great place to put it. Also, in this format, when we're on Zoom, it's really hard to read the group, and that can go two ways. Someone who's speaking can feel like they need to spend more time and emphasize because they're not getting any feedback from people letting them know that they were heard. And it also works as a listener. It can be hard sometimes to read what's happening in the interaction of the meeting, and I feel like the chats can be very useful in that way too. If someone says something that maybe you were in queue that you wanted to say, rather than you having to keep your hand raised, you can just chat in the chat box and say, I agree, that's exactly what I wanted to say, or add a little something. And do you agree that those would be appropriate uses?
I think the short answer is yes. I also, so certainly for sharing links, the reason that I brought this particular bit up is I can't keep track of the chat box. So as the facilitator, I don't know what's happening there. And so that, you know, for whatever that's worth, sometimes that's fine and it could also not be fine, but I can't jump between two screens and try to figure out whose hands are raised and look at the chat box. And so the other piece to that is that we're supposed to be doing everything for the public in front of the public. And so even little things like saying, I agree, that sort of thing is supposed to happen publicly in this setting. And so,
Can I just clarify, people viewing who are not on the Zoom cannot see the chat box, is that correct?
right. And anyone who comes to watches the recording later, they won't have access to it.
So you are not recording the chat, the sessions? Are you going to record them?
They come, and Kevin might have a better answer than I do, but because I don't use this platform at work, but the platform that I use at work, we get an audio file and we get like a narrative of what happened in the chat, whether it's private or not.
Mo?
Yeah.
This is Erica. I just want to do a recommendation. I was going to put it in the chat, but I would like to strongly recommend having an English-Spanish translator to facilitate the flow of information.
Okay.
No, I noticed that that is like definitely an accommodation that has to be made, not just for the panelists who are like English as second language, but also for the people who are out there looking and listening. There is a possibility in webinars to add captions in a second language and having a person to do that. So I think I would really appreciate having that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. I can jump in and just remind folks that the chat feature is not available to the public. And in order to comply with public meeting law, it's my understanding that the chat function can only be used for procedural things during the meeting. We cannot have substantive conversations going on between panelists on the chat, is my understanding.
So Mo, if we could make the change to limit the use of the chat box to procedural and informational items only.
Okay. How's that look?
Looks, can we get a motion to approve from anyone?
Yeah, I move that we approve the group agreements as it currently reads.
I would like to second that motion.
Who seconded that? Sorry.
That was David Saez.
Awesome. Thank you. All in favor, try raising your hand on your, thank you, Erica. Let's see, Marty Wilder, Joshua Purvis, Lindsay Foltz, Jason Mack, Leah Edelman, Ems Avalos, Daniel Borson, Alai Reyes Santos, Silverio Mogart, Justin Myers, Sandra Shotridge, David Saez, Guadalupe Quinn, Macy Davis, Tana Nelson, Leticia Serna, Quentin Reynolds, Dr. Betsy Davis. Rick Rosetta has his hand up, and Erica Ling Congo had her hand up, and Rick Hamilton has his hand up. Marvin Raval's got his hand up. Is there anyone else who's having trouble? I'm scrolling now through my screen. There's some chat things happening.
Hey, Mo.
Yes.
Hate to be the fly in the ointment here. We had a motion on the table from Lindsay Foltz to approve the group agreements as written with the previous verbiage on item number 12. That motion should be voted on before we make any changes.
It did not have a second.
I would be happy to accept a friendly amendment to the change of the wording in number 12 and proceed with the vote, proceed with the second and the vote that we just took, if that's acceptable.
All right.
I'm looking at you, Kevin. I don't know if that's,
Yeah. So Lindsay has asked for a friendly amendment. This is a time for one of the panelists, one of the committee members, to add the friendly amendment, which recognizes the change in verbiage on number 12, and then to accept the vote as counted.
This is Josh Purvis. I propose the amendment to Lindsay's motion.
Thank you, Josh.
Point of clarification, can you tell us the exact verbiage?
Yeah. Here's another, you're witnessing Kevin being a little bit clunky here, folks, and I apologize. We're getting into a little bit of the weeds of Robert's Rules of Orders very quickly. We didn't anticipate this coming up, but the fact is that Lindsay, the only thing that Lindsay can do at this point is to withdraw her motion. It comes off the table, and then
I will
we have
happily withdraw my motion. The motion that just passed and was voted on is perfectly acceptable.
All right, thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Everyone who raised their hand in favor, please put your hand down. And all of those, I'm going to ask folks who are opposed to the motion to pass the group agreements as written to please raise their hands. Quentin Reynolds, Patricia Toledo, I'm going to scroll through my, okay, thank you both. And I'm going to ask the two of you to please put your hands down. And I'm going to ask for folks who would like to abstain from this vote to please raise your hands. Okay. Seeing none, the motion passes. I will check in Quentin and Patricia to see, I'll check in tomorrow to see what we could do to make those work better for the two of you. So we're gonna move on now to staff presentations on community representation and oversight. So the first person who's going to present to the group is Leah Pitcher from the Police Auditor's Office.
Hi, Mo. Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Pitcher from the Police Auditor's Office. I'm the Deputy Police Auditor, which sometimes makes me sound like I work in the Sheriff's Department, but I don't. I'm a civilian, and it just means I'm the second in command, I guess, of the Auditor's Office. The police auditor himself is here to help answer questions, but tonight's my night for presenting. So I want to thank you all for your service to the community, for coming to these meetings and doing this work. I really appreciate it. I have a quick, really general PowerPoint. I'm going to try to speed it up since I noticed we're running late and I value your time, but I will share my screen now. So this is about civilian oversight in Eugene. Civilian oversight is part of both Campaign Zero Solutions and the Pillars of 21st Century Policing. So I'm sure you have all of that in your packets and you're going over all of that, but because it is an important part of both of those plans, we thought it would be helpful to give a little presentation on how our current oversight system works. For those of you who might not be familiar with it. The body cams part is highlighted because, as I'll speak about later, one of the, I think, very important parts of community oversight is that we have access to all of the video that EPD takes during while they're working. So body camera video, in-car video, that's all accessible to our office. We don't keep those records. We're not the keeper of the records, but whenever we have an incident, we can ask EPD for that video and they get it to us rapidly. They're very responsive with that. So Oversight in Eugene, and this is a real umbrella view. And like I said, I'm here to answer questions after this. So please feel free to come to ask those after this. So there's basically three sort of pillars of oversight in Eugene. There's the police auditor's office, which is where I work. We are a full-time, fully staffed office. We report directly to council, which means we don't report to the city manager. We don't report to the police chief. We are fully separate from the rest of city government. We are the intake point for all complaints about EPD employees, which sort of translated means that we take civilian complaints from people in the community. We also review complaints from inside of the department. If the complaint is about a person who reports to the chief ultimately, then it comes through our office for classification. We do have the sole responsibility for classifying complaints, which means basically directs how they are investigated. And then we participate and oversee the investigations of those complaints. We get about 400 complaints a year, and on average, upper 300s to 400. And I can talk more about how those are investigated. The Civilian Review Board is a group of volunteers who oversee our work and the work of the internal affairs investigations. Typically, they meet about 10 times per year. They are required to have meetings with public comments quarterly, but they do much more than that. Especially this year, Civilian Review Board has been looking at their own protocols and their own practices to make sure that they are doing as much as they can for the community. And we have representatives from the CRB on this body, Lindsay Foltz and Rick Rosetta, who will be speaking about their experiences and answer questions also. The Police Commission also, Jeremy Cleversey is here. He staffs the Police Commission, so he will talk about them, but they look at police policies. So one way to look at it is our office is reactive. We take complaints, for the most part, we are reactive. We take complaints, we investigate those complaints. We do make policy recommendations, but we are not the formal body for policy recommendations. That's Police Commission. They are proactive in that way. These are our governing statutes, laws, all the things that sort of go into or give us rules for what we do. I'm noticing things in the chat box, but I can't actually see what they are. So Mo or Kevin or someone, if there's something you want me to respond to right away, please just interrupt me, okay? All right, so we are governed by state law. Mostly that's public records law. There's state statutes governing discipline and rights in disciplinary investigations for public safety officers. There's also a state requirement that each county have a deadly force investigation plan. So that is, I think it was Senate Bill 111. It affected several different statutes, but that's the statute that requires each county to have their own plan for investigating officer-involved shootings. So city charter is section 15A was the originating thing, I guess, the originating document for our office. The voters back in, I believe, 2006 voted this change to the city charter into place that created both the auditor's office and the Civilian Review Board. And then there are city ordinance sections, city code sections that implement those charter commands. Or I don't have all my words tonight. I'm very sorry. I'll keep working. But so there's a code that basically enacts what the voters put in place in the charter. The collective bargaining agreement between the city and the Eugene Police Employees Association also governs some of what we do. They govern a lot of the internal affairs processes, which Cindy Coleman is here to talk about. And then we also have Civilian Review Board protocols, which are negotiated, collectively bargained between the Civilian Review Board between the city and the police union. And then just two things that are sort of note that come up frequently are community impact cases are in that section of city code. That is where the Civilian Review Board can select cases for a different kind of review, where they jump in earlier and offer an adjudication recommendation to the chief. And then the Lane County Deadly Force Investigation Plan is the plan that sets out how officer-involved shootings are investigated. They are investigated by an interagency team, which, well, we have, and well, I'll come back to that later. So in general, we participate in the investigations of police. We make recommendations to the chief of police about how those investigations, what those investigations have found, whether the behavior alleged is a violation of policy, whether or whether it's within policy. We make that recommendation to the chief. So does the EPD chain of command. And then the chief of police makes the final decision on adjudications. One thing to note is that we are not involved in disciplinary decisions. That is reserved for the police chief. So that's not reviewable by our office or by the Civilian Review Board. That is a very fast overview. So I will be available for questions. I think that's all I've got right now.
Okay, and I don't know if folks saw in the chat, but we'll be fielding questions after all of the presentations. So there's 2 more, and then you'll hear from your colleagues on this board, and then there'll be Q&A for everybody. So next we've got Cindy Coleman from the Eugene Police Department.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I will also be presenting a very high-level review of the investigations process at Eugene Police Department. And so I will try to share my screen now. Okay. So internal affairs is part of the Office of Professional Standards.
We don't see the screen shared,
Oh,
Cindy.
you don't see it. I'm sorry. Thank you. Do you see it now? Yep. Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So internal affairs is part of the Office of Professional Standards, and we report directly to the Chief of Police. We share a database with the Police Auditor's Office, and that is where we track and monitor all complaints received, whether it's an internally generated complaint or a complaint from the community. We also track reportable use of force, vehicle pursuits, vehicle accidents, risk claims, and other incident types, all in that same database. The internal affairs investigators conduct the internal affairs investigations as well as risk claim investigations. And another function of our office is through those investigations, we identify trends, lessons learned. We also can make policy recommendation changes if something is identified in a investigation, as well as training needs. One of the things that is important to know is what governs police officers' conduct. It's quite a large scope. One is the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics. The other is the Police Operations Manual. You'll hear that referred to as the POM. Also, the city's Administrative Policy Manual. So that's policies that apply to all City of Eugene employees, as well as all the city, state, and federal laws. Leah touched on this a little bit, but here I kind of wanted to break this down in phases for the group to understand. The way that we have this organized is there's the intake and classification of a complaint. Pardon me. There's multiple intake methods already. People can contact the auditor's office in multiple ways. They can contact a police supervisor. Regardless how the complaint comes in, they all get routed to the police auditor, who ultimately classifies the complaint. Depending on how the complaint is classified will depend on the type of investigation that occurs. And also the auditor is notified of all critical incidents, such as a use of deadly force incident. So once the complaint is classified, if it's classified as an allegation of misconduct, those will almost always are assigned to an internal affairs sergeant. They will conduct the investigation. The auditor's office fully participates in and oversees those investigations. Once the investigation is concluded, it gets routed to the involved employee's chain of command so that they can make an adjudication recommendation. It concurrently is routed to the auditor's office, so they review the entire investigation as well. And both the chain of command and the auditor can submit or do submit adjudication recommendations. The chief of police is the person that makes the final adjudication decision. If a case is sustained or it's determined that the policy was violated, then it gets routed back to the employee's supervisor through that chain of command, and they make a disciplinary recommendation to the chief. And then the chief will determine the discipline or corrective action. This is just a very simplified flow chart that shows the auditor classifies the complaint. I will assign the case based on the classification to either an IA sergeant if it's an allegation, or if it's classified as a supervisor action, which are service complaints, policy complaints, and inquiries, those get assigned usually to the employee's immediate supervisor. Again, if it's an allegation, once the investigation is complete, it goes to the chain of command for adjudication. But with the supervisor action, they investigate the complaint. It goes to their reviewing manager, it gets routed to the auditor, and then it is closed. So this again relates to internal affairs investigations. So once the investigation is complete, the sergeant and the auditor meet to discuss the case, and the sergeant will forward their recommended adjudication onto the lieutenant, the captain, the deputy chief, and to the chief, as well as the auditor will send their recommendation to the chief. And again, in those cases where there's been a policy violation that has been sustained, then it goes on to the disciplinary phase, where the supervisor, the sergeant, internal affairs, and the employee resource center at the City of Eugene will discuss the case, provide discipline comparables to the sergeant, who then, based on those comparables, will recommend the discipline. And again, it goes through the chain of command, the lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, to the chief, who decides the discipline. And then it's routed back to the sergeant or the supervisor to administer that discipline. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Cindy. And now we have Jeremy Cleversey from the Eugene Police Commission. Jeremy, if you're talking, yeah, we can hear you now.
And are you able to see the presentation? Yes, perfect. Okay. Bring this up. Okay. So the Police Commission, I just want to start by first thanking Leah and Cindy for going first there. Leah, thank you for your explanation of how the Police Commission is kind of that third pillar. And just speaking with the chair before this presentation, I had asked him how he would describe, or if there's anything he'd add, and he said that he likes to portray the police commission as the proactive side, and so it was fun to hear Leah say the same thing. So this is us in the days of COVID, working on a policy. I'm going to quickly jump past the overview because of time and just jump in here. So the police commission is composed of 12 individuals. We have 2 liaisons to city council, who I believe are attending this meeting right now, both Councilor Ye and Ellen Zelenka, or Councilor Zelenka. We also have liaisons from the Human Rights Commission and the Civilian Review Board, and then 8 citizens at large. The way that they are appointed is by the mayor, or the mayor nominates and council appoints. We are created by an ordinance, City Code 2.368 to be exact. And then to just highlight some keys here of the powers and duties of the commission. Their intent is to increase communication throughout the city regarding police policy. Then there's to identify police policy and resource issues, to decrease misunderstandings when reviewing those policies and practices, to reflect the community values, and lastly there, trying to balance community priorities. Next, I'm showing you the goals as have been taken directly from their bylaws. And those are to protect civil rights and reflect Eugene's rich culture of diversity, to increase communication and understanding and trust, to encourage problem solving, and to provide fair opportunities. The mission is to make recommendations to City Council, the City Manager, and to the police chief or the police department through the police chief. And chief is a non-voting panelist or individual that sits at the table along with a policy sergeant, Sergeant Kyle Williams, and as well as there's a union representative police union representative who sits at the table. So that as the police commission is reviewing these policies and procedures, they are able to provide that necessary feedback. The police commission does meet on the Thursday of every month, or sorry, the second Thursday of every month. Just a quick highlight, I took this from the fiscal year 2021 work plan review that was to be presented to City Council. I highlighted the third bullet point down there, which is the continued recommending 21st century policing concepts of police legitimacy to be incorporated into policy, including guardian mentality and de-escalation. This is work that I thought that this board would be interested in. The Police Commission has done this for several years, but in fiscal year 2018, they had really dug into it, and a couple years prior to that. So just thought I'd highlight that. Work plan priorities. So the Police Commission meets May every other year, and they put together a plan for the next 2 years that they take to council. And council may either approve or make some friendly suggestions to how they might adjust that plan, or they could make large changes. But in most part, they've been council, I'd say, has been pretty happy with the Police Commission's work plan. And part, I think that's because we have the 2 council members that are there and working with us on a regular basis. So here are in kind of, there are 15 different things that they're working on, but in summary here, these are the themes: supporting emergency issues or emerging issues, which right now is imperative, community safety initiative, the community outreach, diversity, equity, inclusion. These were all things that were highly stressed at the May 4, 2019 retreat. Use of force and transparency, and homeless services as they relate to the police department. So here is the emerging issues work plan. So rather than give you the 15 things that they had for the 2 years, this is what has been developed in the interim of what they believe is pertinent to today. And they did that by reaching out to Chief Skinner and Policy Sergeant Kyle Williams. And the chief and the sergeant put this list of policies together that they thought were pertinent to have civilian oversight and review of as soon as possible. And that includes the public assemblies and demonstrations, Policy 316, civil disturbances, Policy 317, field force, Policy 318, pepper ball Policy 804, and handcuffing, control holds, and impact weapons. Something interesting to note is the pepper ball policy had actually been reviewed earlier that year, but or earlier this year, but given the use of it recently with crowd control, the chief requested that it be brought back and reviewed by the commission so that we could apply lessons learned. Other than that, I have the how to get involved, but as I understand, this packet will be sent out to you later, and for time purposes, I'm going to go ahead and sign out there.
Thank you, Jeremy. So now it's time to hear from your peers on the group. Rick Rosetta and Lindsay Foltz are your representatives from the Civilian Review Board. There we go.
Let me yield to Lindsay. She's the chair of the committee.
Oh, perfect. Lindsay.
Darn, Rick, I thought you were going to go first. Okay. So I'll try to be brief. I was trying to synthesize my thoughts from serving on the committee off and on for the past, I think, about 5 years. So I'm going to read my notes so that I stay on track because I'm not a linear thinker. Basically, this is just my testimony. So I'm speaking on behalf of myself based on my experience as a member of the Civilian Review Board. So I want to draw your attention to 3 cases that connect to all the policy recommendations I would like for this committee to consider proposing. And I have like an extremely detailed document that I'll distribute through the moderators after this meeting that have all the minutes from these cases, the involved policies I'd like to draw your attention to, my personal suggested changes, how they connect to Campaign Zero, and the supporting documents. So I started going through this, and it's very long, I'm afraid, but I think it's detailed. And one of the things I heard from people at the last meeting is that people wanted specific and actionable items. So I tried to provide that in the document that I'll send out through the moderator or through the facilitators. So I've broken my concerns down into 2 separate categories. So there's policies related to civilian oversight, and there's broader concerns that I have based on witnessing cases. So in terms of civilian oversight, my current concerns include policies and practices related to body-worn video, lack of transparency or accountability regarding discipline for sustained cases of misconduct, restrictions on public comment at CRB meetings, and the timelines for filing complaints with the auditor's office. So those are most directly related with the civilian oversight process here in Eugene. My broader concerns based on witnessing cases involve, my most urgent concern involves de-escalation. So the 3 cases, all that I'm highlighting and that you'll see in this document, all occurred before body-worn cameras were implemented at EPD and were negatively impacted by the lack of footage. So I'll start by praising the implementation of the body-worn cameras. From my perspective, they're extremely useful for civilian oversight. However, I do think I have recommendations to improve body-worn camera policy and implementation practices that I'll summarize here in really short terms: no muting, no selective disabling, permanent retention of footage, and mandating use on all sworn personnel, including SWAT. So like the 1-sentence summary of these 3 cases and then how it relates, because I'm just going to try to wrap it up really quick. The first case is from January 12th of 2016 and involved the police shooting of a veteran with PTSD. In this case, at the time of the shooting, the force was ruled as reasonable and I agreed with adjudication that the officer had not violated policy. However, I mark this as the beginning of my advocacy for de-escalation as the centerpiece of our public safety strategy. So we have a de-escalation policy from May 2018 influenced by this case, but there's still more to do. And so I've detailed my recommendations for specific things that could be improved in terms of improving skill, reward, and accountability to de-escalate. That case also highlighted for me that the man's family was prevented from providing public comment at the CRB meeting where his case was discussed, which didn't feel right to me. And so I advocate that this protocol, the CRB protocol, be amended, which would require collaboration with the police union to change that CRB protocol. The second case was a mother who called 911 in the middle of the night asking for help from Cahoots for her son who was in mental health crisis. This is from September 14th of 2016. Cahoots was not available because at the time they didn't run 24/7, and so EPD responded. Again, while the use of force was determined to be within policy by Chief Kearns, who was the chief at the time, there was definitely officer behavior that escalated the situation and necessitated the level of force that was used. So again, this case was before current de-escalation policy, but as of this date, as of today, I've not yet seen one case classified by the auditor's office as a violation of de-escalation policy. And I've reason to believe that's about to change, and I hope that it does, because I'm tired of seeing justified use of force due to unjustified escalation, by my estimation. So the last case has to do with timeliness and my frustration that the time within which people must submit complaints to the auditor's office is very short. It's a 60-day window for minor complaints and a 6-month window for allegations of more serious misconduct, with some additional sort of vague language about the auditor can consider cases beyond these windows with good cause. This case came to me from, it has not been reviewed publicly by the CRB, but I was approached by a mother who was concerned about the investigation of the death of her 10-month-old son, and that in part because DHS wasn't properly notified of his death by EPD, she didn't realize that she had reason to suspect her son's death wasn't natural. And so—
Hey, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt. Just in the, I'm doing my little timekeeper job here, sorry. Sure. Just in the interest of time, if you could wrap up your comments, totally. That'd be appreciated. Yep. Yeah,
I'm in the last minute. So, so in this case, I think that with good cause should be considered. I think the city attorney at the time advised that threshold had not been met, but I would like the 60-day window and the 6-month window to be reconsidered, and the interpretation of good cause to be sufficiently broad to reasonably meet the needs and expectations of community. So that is all that I will share here, and I will yield to Rick.
Thank you, Lindsay. As usual, a nice job. I'm not going to go into as much detail in the interest of time. I don't have as much detail actually laid out as Lindsay did. My impression so far on my experience in the Civilian Review Board is that it is a full and honest, respectful discussion of the issues that are presented to us. I think there are some issues related to the types of cases that come to us. There are some cases that we deal with that are probably not worth a lot of time on. There are some that are worth a lot of time and effort. And it's hard to know at the beginning which one we're looking at each time it comes around. I think that I agree with her completely about the use of the body cams. I was on the board before body cams were available, and I've been on the board since, and you wouldn't believe the difference. Why there was some resistance on the part of the force to body cams in the first place is difficult for me to understand, because it, in 9 times out of 10 cases, gives a factual account of what actually happened at the time, and gives the people who are adjudicating the issues later a more clear version than would be necessary if we had to rely upon the facts as they come out of the mouths of the people that were there. But I do agree that there should be changes to the body cams. And this really relates more to that issue than it does to the formation of the oversight by civilians. But I would agree that we should eliminate the muting for, quote, tactical reasons, and that we should have those cameras on as much as possible. One of the issues that came up early or lately has been the issue about whether the civilian oversight should be an elected body as opposed to an appointed body by the city council. The Civilian Review Board reports to the city council, and I think we have some problems with having an elected body because of the necessity to have detailed background checks on the people that are members of the board in order to guarantee confidentiality of the people involved in the investigations. Because we have access to matters that could be confidential depending on the situation, it's necessary to have the background checks, and so that would not lend itself to a public vote on those people present. We are subject to public comment, and I think that works fine. Not very many people usually show up at our meetings, but those that do are listened to carefully and respectfully. With that, I'll let it go. I want to stress that it's been a great experience to be involved in this board. I've been impressed with the people involved. We take it seriously, and we find that the current chief and the department are trying their best at the present time. Thank you.
Thank you both. Now it's time to hear from your colleagues who sit on the Police Commission. I'm going to have Macy Davis go first if you're ready, and then Silver Mulder.
Hello. Given that I just started on the Police Commission, I don't have much to say about it other than that I am enjoying the experience, and I will pass it off to my fellow commissioner.
Hello. So yes, I've been on the Eugene Police Commission for 4 years, and it seems like it's been longer. By and large, the Police Commission representation has not been what it is currently. So it lacked a lot of diversity, and I want to again thank the City Council and the Mayor for giving us an opportunity to kind of open up those positions again, and then have some additional input from the community and applications come in from the community. I'm really looking forward to working with the new commissioners. My screen is froze. Okay, there we go. So one thing that is an issue with those voices is that up until very recently, the body, the Police Commission, has not had a lot of different perspectives on policy matters that were going forward. And that's an issue. It's problematic, and it's one of the reasons why we opened up the application process again. I was a person who was pushing for diversity, and for some of the conversation pieces to be centered around diversity and at the Police Commission. So that was something that Jeremy had indicated to you all earlier. From my perspective, when we are brought policies and there's a discussion around the table, there feels to be, to me, it feels like there's some hesitancy from people who don't want to have conflict, who don't want to kind of stir the pot or raise concern or questions. And so that's often made it feel like we've kind of not had the greater discussion that we should on some policy issues. I think every policy issue that's brought to us merits a greater understanding and discussion about some of the implications and some of the possible outcomes from these policy issues that are brought to us. So I have no issue with policy being written and brought back to us for any number of meetings, and we've had a few things that we've done several times. So I'm hoping that kind of changes with the new body, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of our experiences with the rest of the commissioners and kind of getting a better understanding from the community that I represent in particular, or from different communities, so we can have that engagement and that legitimacy and that trust built into the department. And that's what 21st century policing is based upon: legitimizing and building trust and making sure that there's some, as Rick mentioned the last time, communication built between the community and the police department. I also do want to focus on the move from a sort of warrior mentality to more of a guardian sort of mentality and lens from the EPD. So I know that there's been discussion about what this body, that this ad hoc committee body, is going to be doing, and are we going to be presenting this information to the Eugene Police Commission? Will that Police Commission in turn sort of approve it, or make their own considerations or recommendations, and then move it on to the chief and send it through the rest of the process? I look forward to this committee and the different pieces that we're going to be able to add to current policy. I really see this as an opportunity for a greater diversity of voices to be heard, and for some sort of more I'm trying to phrase it in a way that's clear, that we can move the EPD policy and the body and the force to a place where they have a greater understanding of what we as a community, who we represent as a community currently, wish to see. That's it.
Thank you. So now we've got, and I did a terrible job of catching us up on time. I'm sorry, but I'll do better next time. Now it's time for questions from you all to the staff, to your colleagues. Kevin's going to be keeping time for us. The best way to raise your hand is to do it in the chat box or in the panelist list, because that's what I'm looking at. If you can't do that, you can send a chat my way. I've got Joshua Purvis.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to send the question via the chat window as well, but this is Josh Purvis with the NAACP. Question for Leah Pitcher, and then Lindsay and Rick, if you want to comment, I'm welcome to it. So Leah, in response to a series of questions I sent Mark Gissner, he wrote that the Civilian Review Board is not exempt from Oregon's public records law, which to me implies that Oregon State Statute 192.34512 has no precedent of impeding their work. Yet he also noted that although they know whether discipline is imposed on a Eugene police employee, they do not know the level of that discipline. Can you clarify the degree to which that statute, which conditionally exempts personnel discipline action or materials or documents supporting that action from being disclosed, can limit the Civilian Review Board's duty to, quote, increase the transparency of and public confidence in the police complaint process, and whether the complaint was handled fairly and with due diligence?
I'm happy to answer that. I see that Mark is on and unmuted, so I don't know if he is wanting to jump in, but I will go unless he speaks. So I think, so the fact that CRB knows that discipline has occurred is a sort of byproduct of them knowing that an allegation has been sustained. So they have access to the entire investigative file from internal affairs. They have video, they have recordings, they have everything that we see. They have that access, and to have that access, they go through a background check so that they are permitted to see those records from EPD. They are not exempt from public records law in that they cannot give identifying information about those cases out during their public meeting or any other time, nor can I. Unless that's been vetted by city attorneys and found to be, you know, of public importance, such that it's exempt or it's allowed to be disclosed. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question. CRB is as transparent as they can be given the limitations of public records law. They are not exempt from public records law. They are not allowed to release records that EPD has created. Does that make sense?
Yes, it leads to a follow-up question, but I'll jump back in the queue.
Okay.
And if I might add, I think Josh, what you're asking for is, can the CRB make a public record that is generated, a public personnel record that is generated by the police department? They cannot. They are exempt in that the business that they conduct is a public record when they are the generator of the record.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just say that we have no insight into the disciplinary process? So just to be super clear, it's one of my main criticisms. I actually don't advocate that we have any adjudication authority over discipline, but I think the lack of transparency in discipline is a major deficit in our current civilian oversight system. But that's just me. I know that is not a universally held opinion.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, I'm gonna move us on. David, I saw your comment and I'm putting you in the queue, but I've got a handful of folks in front of you. So Alain Reyes Santos, go ahead.
Yes, I have two questions for presenters, whoever can answer best. So the first question is clarifying. So in kind of that flow chart that Leah, you presented, so I'm understanding that the CRB is one of the bodies that gets to make a recommendation before adjudication happens by the chief. That's my question. Okay, and so I'll have a second one, and that way you can handle them both. The second one is why, I'm trying to understand why is it that to be able to qualify as a CRB member, there needs to be a background check. And I bring attention to this because if we're trying to think about creating more civilian oversight and overview and actually diversifying that space, that background check may actually be an impediment, an obstacle to actually creating that kind of access for many low-income communities and communities of color, to say, you know, just to name a few. So that's just two questions. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the questions. So the answer to the first one about CRB input into adjudication is, of course, it depends. In general, they do not have input into adjudication. They don't inform on that before the chief adjudicates. They review it afterwards. So in a typical case, our office and the chain of command make a recommendation to the chief, and the chief adjudicates. And then once that case is closed, the Civilian Review Board looks at the whole file. And they have in the past disagreed with how the chief adjudicated that case. And they've chosen various methods of letting the chief know that. So they do have that level of accountability. The chief has that accountability for the decision that is the final decision.
No me pueden ver ni oír.
Oh, sorry. I have the exception. I can't tell who's talking, but I'm going to answer the exception and then the second question. So the exception is the community impact case, and that is its own section of city code that I referenced and we can send out to you all. In a community impact case, the chief makes their adjudication And then the Civilian Review Board has a limited amount of time in which to look at that file and make clear to the chief whether they agree with that adjudication, whether they think it needs additional investigation, or whether they disagree with it. And they send that notification to the chief, and then the chief has a certain amount of time to react to that. So they have the chief has adjudicated it, but it's possible that it could be changed based on CRB input, if that makes sense. And that's in this one specific type of case. So I hope that answers that question. On the background checks, I agree. That's definitely something that Mark and I have talked about and been concerned about. I believe the background check requirement is from the protocols, Mark, and maybe you'd be better able to answer that one than I am.
Actually, and Cindy might actually be able to answer it. There are federal and state requirements in terms of access to confidential records. And so we all have to go through a background check, I think on an annual basis in terms of how, in other words, access to files and confidential policing information. And I think that comes all the way down from the federal government. So I would agree with you it would give us more diversity, and Cindy's on now, so she can help with that as well.
I think one of the problems with that is that there is definitely CJIS information, or pardon me, confidential law enforcement information and police reports that are included in the files that go to the auditor and then the CRB. So I think that's one of the concerns for the background checks. I don't have the full answer for that though. Was that helpful? Probably not.
I mean, I have more things to say, but there's other people in queue. So thank you so much for answering. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we've got about 30 minutes, so I'm going to kind of rush through as best I can to make sure that folks are able to speak. Next, we have Brian Michael.
Hi there. First, let me say something that I observed, which is conspicuous by its absence, as they say. For some reason, and I don't criticize the reason, we have not heard from a single citizen complainant who has gone through the system to tell us what it was like for them. As a coincidence, I represented one of the 3 cases Lindsay mentioned. It was the mother who called cahoots for her son who was going through a mentally ill episode. 2 police officers arrived. One was professional, the other was enormously violent. And as Lindsay said, he would escalate the situation from calm to agitated, no less than 3 times, in order to agitate the mentally ill person and then commit violent acts upon him. Tasing, punching him in the mouth with his taser in his hand. I could go on. That person I could ask to come to this group and tell you what it's like for a Black woman to go through the police auditor system. Mr. Geisner knows exactly the case I'm talking about. With that said, I encourage you to ask her to come here, but because of the limitation in time, I have but a single question for time purposes. And this is to the police auditor. Do you support your committee having subpoena power from the police department? And do you support complainants being involved in the investigation of their own complaints? Thank you.
Well, Brian, the legislative structure does not currently allow that. I suppose that would be up to the review board to decide whether they think that they should interview police officers and witnesses, and whether or not that would require a change to the ordinance. Currently, they review investigations. They do not conduct investigations. So you're asking if should they conduct investigations, I think is what you're asking. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question, I may have missed that.
Well, the question was, do you support the investigation committee, your office, having subpoena power? I was only asking if you support it. And the second was, do you support complainants being involved in the investigation of their own complaint? Only if you support it.
In terms of my office having subpoena power, there's only two things that we're not entitled to. And that's forcing community member witnesses to give statements and obtaining medical records. Police officers are required to answer our questions in an administrative interview. The police department is required to give us all documents, all recordings, all information involving a particular complaint. And so from our perspective, it would be very, very limited. And I do not support forcing under the penalty of law a community member to give a statement about something that might have happened in which they feel very uncomfortable doing that. And again, secondly, go ahead.
My question was whether or not, in part of the investigation, you would have subpoena power for police, not citizens. There are many documents you're not allowed to obtain as part of your investigation, particularly internal affairs documents.
That's not true.
You can get internal.
We get everything. And the review board, if they review a case, they get everything except knowing when a complaint is sustained, knowing what the actual discipline was, the number, 3-day suspension or a written reprimand. So in terms of my office, we get everything. And the second part of the question, should a complainant be involved in their own investigation? I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
Well, I know the incident I was talking about before, they were prohibited from participating and being a witness. And I think Lindsay mentioned with Babs, the veteran who was murdered or killed, their family wanted to participate and they were prevented as well.
When you mean participate, if you mean give testimony or statement at the same time of their complaint is being heard by the CRB, that is a collective bargaining protocol that existed prior to my arrival. I don't have an issue with the impacted people giving testimony on the date of their case. I don't know the reason why that was put in there because I wasn't here when it occurred, but that is currently a collectively bargained protocol that would have to be changed, if that's what you mean by participation.
Yes, I know my client wanted to participate and was prohibited. And so my question is, do you support that? And second, would you send me the code number that allows you access to all police documents and witnesses, and they are required to appear? Is there a city code that says that?
I believe it's in the ordinance. There's also a decision by the State Employee Relations Board, and I forget whether that was in 2015 or 2017, in which the union challenged our ability to interview officers, and the State Employee Relations Board stated that we are an administrative arm of the city government, and therefore, as a result of the ordinance, can and does participate in all the interviews and gaining all the access to the records.
Fair enough. I wasn't aware of that. My information was the opposite, but you work it more frequently than I do. So I'll look for that. Thank you very much for answering these questions.
Oh, no problem at all, Brian. Thanks for asking. And with regard, I want to make clear to people, the person who's impacted, in this case, your client, Brian, can give a statement at the meeting before or can give a statement at the meeting after, but not a statement at the meeting in which their case is being discussed.
Okay, I'm gonna have to move us on. Thank you for that. Jason Mack.
Sorry, I was having problems unmuting. Thank you everyone for being here so late at night to present to us. I know it's a long day for a lot of you. My question kind of is piggybacking on a bit on Mark's answer, is what role does the police union have in the investigation, adjudication, and the disciplinary processes? And what do you think could be improved for more transparency?
Well, I'll answer first, and then if Leah wants to do follow-up or Lindsay wants to do follow-up. I come from a state, Ohio, that has very open public records law. And in fact, I was thinking about this the other day. When we would complete our investigative reports, we would send the entire report to the complainant. And it would include the officer's name, it would include the discipline, it would include all those things. The state of Oregon has 458 public record exemptions on the books right now. And so they are very protective of the personnel records of public employees. I can't impact that. I've talked about it for, I think, about 11 years now with little success. So I think that could be the most impactful thing. I think that public service is a privilege, not a right. And I think that the community should know that what happens to the most powerful people in our community. If we had someone in Cincinnati, for example, who had 13 complaints, we could say in our annual report, Officer Smith had 13 complaints of use of force during calendar year 2019. And these were the disciplinary steps that occurred with that. Here, all we can say is we had one officer who had this number of complaints and another officer who had this number of complaints, and we can't talk about whether there's any specific discipline. That's all coded in state law. So
30 seconds, please.
Okay, I find that regrettable. The other thing is, Lindsay stated before, only 11 people get to see the files, the 4 members of my staff and the 7 members of the review board. And I think that does a disservice to the public.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Daniel Borson?
Yeah, my question is along the same lines, and I get some of the reasons that we're dealing with individuals and...
Daniel, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you please speak a little closer to the microphone? It's hard to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this better?
Thank you.
Okay. I get that we're dealing with individuals and with personnel issues. Are these cases at least aggregated and anonymized in some way on a regular basis so that policymakers and others and the public can identify trends and potential areas where policies might need to change, where collective bargaining protocols might need to change in the interest of public safety and the public interest?
Absolutely. And Mark, I'm going to jump in on this and feel free to add. But we are also directed to report on trends. So we do that as frequently as we can with workload. But we put out a monthly newsletter which discusses our open and closed cases, every single one of them anonymously as we can per public records law. We also put out an annual report, and the appendices to the annual report include every single complaint we've received and dealt with over the year in a sort of high-level summary form, but it includes every single thing that we heard about. We also do in our annual report include data on discipline to the extent that we feel is acceptable under public records law. So we report on, many allegations resulted in this type of discipline, or this many policy violations resulted in suspension, resulted in documented counseling, that type of thing. So that's in our annual report, and we put that out on the website, obviously every year.
Does that also include data on when actual adjudication might have deviated from the recommended adjudication?
Yes, yes, it does. We have
and does that also include anything about how collective bargaining protocols may have influenced or had an impact on the final adjudication?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the reporting includes what we recommended for adjudication, what the chain of command recommended for adjudication, and what the final adjudication was. People making the adjudication recommendations on the EPD side are not members of the police union. That may help to know. So officers are members of the police union, but sergeants, supervisory staff are not part of the union. They're exempt. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Yeah, well, I don't know. To what extent do then supervisors take into account their adjudication based on what is allowed under the collective bargaining protocols?
Cindy may be a better able. So the adjudications are basically looking at whether an officer violated policy or not, and the policies are written by the chief of police with input from the police commission. So the union doesn't really. The collective bargaining agreement with the union dictates how internal affairs investigations go and timelines for that, but it doesn't have, the collective bargaining agreement doesn't include the specific policies of the police department. Does that help?
Or what disciplinary actions can be taken as a result
Daniel,
of
had,
policy violation?
Several follow-up questions.
Sorry.
Sorry.
If we could move on.
If I may add one thing, if an officer is charged with a criminal offense, those criminal offense records are public records in the state of Oregon. I wanted to clarify that. And we've had several cases over the years in which officers have been charged with criminal conduct for things that they've done on or off duty.
Thank you. David Sayas.
Hey there. So I guess what I would like to do is just say I am supportive of looking into the background check issue related to being on the civilian review board, and then also I'm very much interested in making sure that we're looking into, I guess, the ability for people who are submitting complaints to be able to be present and testify at a hearing that is involving their case. I think one of the big things is building trust, and I think I think we need to do what's necessary to do that. And so my main question was, I mean, do we even know, do we evaluate the effectiveness of the complaint process, like the input? Like, I don't even know if that's good. Like, are we getting, especially when it comes to, I would like to know how communities of color, or especially and non-English speaking community members, how they perceive the process in the system, and if it's helpful and understandable and accessible to them, and what if it's not, then we need to figure that out. Like, I think really, as was said at the last meeting, the relationship and the trust building is going to be huge, because there's a cultural shift that needs to happen, and I'm just wondering what we do to evaluate the effectiveness of that complaint reception, and also the experience of the complainant through the process.
I wanted to touch on your point on the background checks. I think with the background checks, David, it has a chilling effect, I think, on the front end in terms of people applying. I can't ever think of a time in my years that anyone has ever been turned down because of something that might come up in a background check. I'm not even really sure what that is. I think it does, though, have a chilling effect on people who might apply for it because, and it's, you know, it's a laborious process. It's about a 10-page questionnaire, and it certainly, I think, could use refinement. We definitely wouldn't want it to have a chilling effect on anyone applying for the review board. But historically, again, we've had not that many community members that have applied in the first place. In terms of evaluation, I think you're right in many aspects. In terms of, has the culture changed? Is there more trust in the community? And I think that maybe Lindsay or the member of the review board can answer that better than me because they're there to represent the community.
Thank you. I'm going to mix it up a little bit because we are running low on time. So I'm looking at the list and I'm going to start with folks whose voices have not been in this meeting yet. So I'm actually going to move down to the bottom of the list that I have and Colin M's Avalos.
Actually, my questions have been answered by Leah and Mark, by the questions from Daniel and Jason. But I do second what David had to say too. I strongly agree with David, but yeah.
Thank you. Erica Lincongo.
Hi. I just wanted to, you know, for what I'm listening regarding like background checks, it's just like things seem surprising for me that people who are handling such as important issues don't have that kind of, you know, information available to the public. But also, like, you know, as a teacher, I have to do background checks to be in my classroom with my students. So I think that that should be a must. And also, like, regarding, like, for what I listening, it seems to me that in Lane County, police department, Eugene Police Department and Springfield Police Department, it seems like they do benefit from qualified immunity. Am I wrong?
No, you are not. Actually, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just issued a decision. A U.S. Federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in California, includes Oregon, just issued a decision confirming qualified immunity for police officers. And I wish I could remember the name of the case off the top of my head, but it was just issued, I think, fairly recently. And then actually the Ninth is considered one of the more progressive courts out of the circuit court system, federal circuit court system. And again, we don't have any involvement in that. It may be able to be amended at the state level, but again, at the federal level, it has been reaffirmed for a claim on an officer-involved shooting in Sacramento, I think.
But in my understanding, there is also cases at the federal level that had been, there are precedents about people defending against police brutality. And also I feel that, you know, like by this reaffirmation, I would like to answer. So what is the thing we need to do to change that status, almost godlike status for police officers so they can become normal mortals? What do we do?
Again, I think that would be a discussion that you would have with your state legislatures. Someone just sent me the name of the case. It was Monson, M-O-N-S-O-N versus City of Murrieta. And that was the Ninth Court case. But certainly
the two cases, I don't remember from the top of my head. I had been planning the whole day, but I will definitely send to our facilitator the two cases that I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
Patricia Toledo, I think this is going to be the last one.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'd like to ask for how are we keeping track of racial profiling in our community, and how is that transparent in the records that you are keeping in your auditor office?
I can jump in on that one, unless you, Mark, you have your mouth open.
I was going to also say Cindy Coleman also is required, I think, for the Office of Professional Standards to report all those incidents and everything. So in fact, she might be best equipped to answer what the state requirements are, which are very vigorous at this point, I'm pleased to say.
So yes, any complaints that are received by the police department or the auditor's office are investigated, and I do send a report out on each of those complaints on those investigations to LECC, so the state body that accepts those. But I wasn't sure if you were talking about those complaints or police stops data.
Not only police stop, but I will say, any complaint that comes from the community that involves people of color, it is not reflected in the reports. So how we can track better every time that a police officer, how many times a police officer is involved in a complaint with people of color.
We do track all police complaints regarding bias-based policing. So that would include of color or other protected classes. So those are tracked in a shared database with our office and the police auditor's office. And then I report those all out to the state.
And now the state requires
community.
Pardon me?
And how is that presented to the community?
Both the auditor's office and my office prepare annual reports, so that would be noted in there.
And I think also, again,
so that accurate, like any complaint that involves people of color is classified like that?
No, I'm speaking about complaints where the subject of the complaint, the nature of the complaint is that a person is alleging that an officer did bias-based policing.
So if the person doesn't express that sentiment that it was racially targeted, so it's not considered profiling. That's what you're telling me.
If it's classified by the auditor, if the nature of the complaint is that the officers were biased in their policing decision, then we capture that for sure. I'm not sure that I'm answering your question fully.
We're gonna
if you go to the court and you sit there and you see that 30 times the same police officer is involved in incidents involving people of color, you start wondering something is wrong with him, right? But because I go and sit there and I see it, I can wandering around that. But if it's nobody's tracking it or it's not reported like that, how are we gonna be able to track it?
Patricia, I'm sorry that I have to interrupt. We have got to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
comments. So anyone else that has questions for this particular panel of folks, if you could email them to Kevin, Kaz, or myself, we will make sure they get to the right people, and we'll do the same thing that we did before this meeting. You'll get kind of with the packet, you'll get the answers to your questions. And I'm going to move us on to next steps, and I'm going to let Kevin talk about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, panelists. We are at the end of our late evening tonight. I want to thank you for your participation, and let's talk about next steps. So as Mo mentioned, many important issues discussed tonight, lots of questions that were answered, some partially, some fully, some not at all, and because we didn't have time. So I'm encouraging you to email me or Kaz with your questions, and we will do our best to respond to you and the rest of the panelists. This is a public process, and we have to make sure that all questions are available to the public and all answers are available to the public. Please keep your eyes out in the next couple days in your email inbox for a prioritizing survey, and that will allow you to rank the issues that you feel are most important for this committee to focus on moving forward. Also, keep your eyes out for the doodle poll, which will determine the dates and times of all subsequent meetings. That's it that I have. Kaz, anything else you want to add?
Nope, I believe that's everything.
All right, very good. I want to extend thank yous to our city council people who are attending this evening, the mayor and city manager, and members of the public. Thank you very much. Especially to you panelists. We appreciate your participation, and thanks to Mo Young for your facilitation tonight. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.
You all take good care.